I put this on the agenda, but I think Annabelle, this is really your question. So like, if you want to ask the question and then I have some thoughts and then Pedro might have thoughts and then maybe you'll have more questions, but maybe we start there.
Yeah, so I wrote this last week. It has to do with the fluid versus fixed width for inline changes. Yeah, I just wasn't sure how we really typically work, because back in years ago, we would kind of just make these changes. We didn't have feature flags, but we would just make changes and see what happened. Good and bad, obviously, but it was kind of nice to see that immediate feedback. And for this change, I was thinking it might not be the best idea to move forward with it without looking into it more. So I suggested like an MVC, but it kind of got pushed through anyway, and I wasn't sure why. I don't necessarily disagree with the issue. I think it's an interesting proposal and it might be the way forward. I'm just not sure why this one was confidently pushed forward when it was only opened a couple of weeks ago, as opposed to some other changes, and then put behind a feature flag. And then how often do we want to do this kind of stuff, testing things within GitLab with feature flags?
Cool, thanks. I think I think all of those are really fair questions and points. And so I will try and, at least from my perspective, where this came from, and how it sort of got there. Maybe that's the easier question to answer first. This issue came out of the planning session, which is the thing that we do monthly, where we sort of bring issues that are potentially less likely to be prioritized otherwise, and use it, and like we get to talk about them and sort of vote and discuss them. And so and this is also looks funny, I put this one on the board because it was something that I had been thinking about in terms of feedback that I had heard about white space on the page, and how code review should be the focus and take up the whole page. And so I knew we had fluid width, and usually when someone opens one of those issues, I'm like, go turn on fluid width, and everyone says, oh, sure, that's sort of what I was thinking, and people move on. So I brought this up, and then we put it in the session, and it got prioritized quickly because it got voted highly in the session, and we had the capacity to do that. Not everything that gets voted highly in the session gets prioritized quickly, and because we don't always have the capacity, but that in this case we did, because of needing front end only work that doesn't involve back end and other things. So that's, I think that's probably my answer for why it got prioritized the way it did. Could have been that there were other issues as well that got brought there. If you had ideas for ones, and if they got voted on highly, then like we would have just put those in too. Like, it wasn't necessarily that it's the best idea or the most researched idea or anything, other than like, it seemed like it was achievable by a group of people. And so that's why it got there.
Have there been, do you offhand know any other examples of issues that have kind of followed the same process? I'm just curious.
I don't. That's an interesting question. I don't, Pedro, do you happen to like, I don't have an offhand way to gauge sort of how many issues are sort of things we wouldn't likely have done, but did because of the prioritization sessions, since you've been running them? I feel like it's maybe everything, but not to this degree.
That we would not have done them if it wasn't for the prioritization. I don't know. It's difficult to say. It's like, what if, because we've been doing them for so long now. I just think that it helps create a space where you describe a number of issues and you think about all of them together and how you would prioritize all of them together if you had to choose one issue over another. So, but I don't know a specific issue, no.
Okay, so going forward now that it's, well, I don't know if it's been merged. I approved it. I don't know what the status of it is. And we turn that feature flag off or on, I don't know. We display it on GitLab. What are we looking for? Like, I'm assuming some people will like it and maybe a vocal minority will strongly dislike it. What is our plan going forward?
Yeah, I think the feature flag question is sort of two questions, because you asked sort of about doing things with or without a feature flag. And so we can talk about that one first. I think one is, from my perspective, code review is incredibly, users of code review are incredibly resistant to change. It's maybe the better way to phrase this. And so we tend to probably deploy with more feature flags than other groups, because we need to be able to back out changes. Whether we agree or disagree with that, we've had to like sort of rework things before when users weren't comfortable. And so having feature flags gives us that way to do that. And so that's why we probably do more feature flags. In this specific case, one of the reasons I wanted a feature flag was because, to your point about it being not well researched, not necessarily well defined, sort of unclear, the feature flag gives us the ability, if we put it in and the feedback's really bad, to pull that out without needing like the revert commits and other things to like get deployed and do that. And so the feature flag's a faster way to handle that. To your next question about what are we looking for? Typically in code review, we get really prompt feedback from internal users when we've turned things on. And so we're just looking for feedback. We've never necessarily had like thresholds for how much or how little. I mean, even with virtual scrolling, we had a very small minority of developers inside of GitLab who were providing feedback, but the feedback was like pretty breaking to their workflows. And so we had to like deal with that versus, this might not be breaking to anyone's workflow and maybe we can tolerate that. And so we just need to evaluate the feedback as it comes in. But because if we turn things on in just even the GitLab project, we get feedback so quickly. Usually it's pretty effective for us to do that and watch, watch, is this known in questions and see like, what do people start to say and how recurring are those trends? And so there's nothing in my mind that I'm necessarily looking for. I think what I'd like to, if nothing comes out of it, then good, we have more confidence. If people say like, this completely broke my workflow, I can't do XYZ anymore, you missed these 5 bugs, which is also sometimes incredibly common in code review, is not that like, there's so many random combinations of settings and everything else that like, sometimes things just don't play the way we expect them to play on the page. Even though this feels like it should be simple, it's sometimes the simplest changes in code review are not. And so I think we're just trying to hedge on that. And that goes back to the first point about being more cautious in code review than we might be in other areas where like you just ship something and you're sort of like, yeah, it'll be fine. So I think that's that. I think that's that. I think that's how I'm thinking about it and why like feature flag in this case makes sense. It's a issue that we sort of loosely threw together, had some ideas, are putting it in the product really quickly, but it's not validated, not tested, not anything else. And so just all of that makes us so we should be more cautious and just sort of see how that goes.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I guess I wasn't as clear on the purpose of that prioritization session. I just kind of grabbed issues that I was interested in, but in the future, I can include ones that I add, like maybe reducing some padding in places like that, things that won't break workflows. They'll minimal effort and they might have a huge impact. Or okay, it won't be a huge impact, it'll be small. The feature flag, I like that. I like the concept. I know it's a little bit more overhead for development, having to wrap all these things in feature flags and then open an issue to remove all of it. So I just also wasn't sure how. I understand we use them more in code review and that makes sense, as opposed to somewhere like secure. But Yep, I think that all makes sense.
Yeah, and I think the prioritization session is the place to sort of bring, and it doesn't, I would say this one was different too, because we were looking explicitly for front end things, because we were trying to avoid back end. And then front end capacity, when Andre and I went through and did planning, was actually like the planned and known work ended up being a lot lower than we expected. So more prioritization issues even got in than like I had originally thought would fit into planning. This one was a little weird, I think, but in general, to me, that session, and it's been helpful to me, is it's one of those things where like several days before you start going through like, what was that nagging issue that like I've seen a lot of people talking about, but is listed as like a P4 S4 bug that maybe we could just like bring in and get other people's like quick thoughts on it, or what is this other piece? And I think it helps to do that. It also helps to highlight, everyone has like different perspectives on like what users are experiencing or not experiencing. It's been interesting to see like issues Andre brings, or issues that like I get pinged on, or issues that Pedro brings that are like feature related issues that are not things that we're talking about on a regular basis, but like other stuff like that. And just have those conversations with that group to sort of see like, what do we want to work on? What do we not want to work on? And there's always no guarantee that anything gets picked. I'm sure Pedro, there's been multiple milestones where things have ended up in this top right corner and then like don't get in, or they end up there and then we like actually go to scope it and we're like, oh, that's way more work than like we thought it was when we sort of had a 5-second conversation about it. And so, but it gets everyone to start thinking about those, and then bringing the same ones up over and over. I think we've brought the retaining position on like, or when you hit like jump to next thread, like that one I think has hit the board like 5 milestones maybe of someone bringing it to planning, and it's never been prioritized just for whatever reason. And so like it finally made it the cut this time for some reason. But like it's those kinds of like, sometimes you just need to remind everyone like once a month, like, hey, we should really fix that.
Sometimes we just need engineering allocations. I think that was the case for many of the issues that we're doing now. Yeah, I think the way I look at feature flags, other than what Kai said, the user base of code review being a high visible and high impact area, I linked to our documentation on feature flags, and one of the situations where we suggest people use feature flags is when you have invasive changes to the user interface. And I think it's down to how we increase confidence on the solutions. So if we think it's an invasive change or something else, we can do more user research and invest in user research, or we can just put a feature flag. Like we could do zero solution validation and just implement things behind feature flags, right? But that's sometimes it doesn't pay off, right? And it's better for you to do the solution. I think in this case, it was better to do the feature flag because we were quite confident on the solution. The effort to implement it was very small, and it would be harder. We would have to invest more time and effort if we wanted to get accurate feedback through user research without implementing the change itself. So the feature flag, I think, was a good mechanism to control that validation through usage. Yeah, and I think there are more things that we would do. And as Kai said, like one thing is changing the color of something, or very, very small changes in high usage areas that we're not likely going to revert it because of user feedback. But another thing is this very big change that is not only visual, but it affects how people read and consume changes. We think it's the right path. We think it makes sense. It's very small effort. So let's put it behind a feature flag because that's the accurate way that we'll have feedback.
Yeah, that makes sense. And thanks for linking to the documentation, because I see an example of when to use feature flags is the removal of a sidebar. and I'm just really excited about the potential for removing a sidebar on the changes, commits, and pipelines tab. So I'll just feature flag it. I think that would be, I'm not going to keep harping on it, but I think that would be a perfect way. It kind of, to me, it falls in line with what you just said about testing it is going to be kind of a more of an effort trying to find out how people use the sidebar on the commits tab. Or, I mean, luckily we have that data that you posted yesterday too, which was super useful. And we've got that 15% of users, but
Yeah.
It might be worth pushing that one through too, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll
I don't know.
open it
It's
to
I don't know. It's interesting. I think 15%, as I said, it's not a small number. I mean, it's a small 15%. It's small in number, but when you see in terms of number of users, it's a lot of users. It's thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of users.
but none on the pipelines and commits.
Yeah, none in the pipelines and commits. Exactly. I think that's very, very small. And I mean, we don't have that skill, but I remember that example that sometimes people give of Facebook changing something for 1% of the user population, and it affects millions of people. And it's so, it depends. At the end of the day, we have to see it at a case by case basis. But nonetheless, I like the way that you're thinking about removing things. I'm on that team as well.
Yeah, I'll also say I'm Pedro and I will differ in this. I'm all for shipping things and with feature flags and skipping on the research sometimes more than Pedro is. So that's another reason that someone probably got pushed through is it looked like, if I can get Pedro on board without doing the extra research and shipping something, then I always count that one as a win too. So
it's curious because when you joined Kai co-review, you were well, I wouldn't say against feature flags, but you were skeptical of how we were using feature flags.
Yeah.
Which is similar to what we're doing now with the fluid diff. Full width diff.
Yeah, I came out of a group where we got to ship everything without feature flags. It's frustrating to walk into feature flag land, but there are some benefits that we've had. We've had a lot of wins with them, particularly like when we roll out huge features like reviewers and other things that have been harder to understand and digest. They're incredibly good there. So yeah. Cool. Does that answer all your questions? Do you feel I just want to acknowledge it wasn't to try and like push something through like because we wanted to push it through either. Like that wasn't the intent of like using a feature flag and doing all that. It was sort of like going with the flow of needing to fill capacity and other things. So I just want to make sure we didn't like and the goal of those sessions is not to like step on toes and push work through that like I want done or anything else. It happened that way this time. And so I want to make sure that you also feel comfortable in about like bringing up whatever issues you want to that. That's really what those sessions are for. And then in my experience, people are incredibly open-minded in those to like be pretty rational about voting on feasibility and importance and making decisions as a group about what makes sense and what doesn't. Ultimately, then it becomes a capacity problem, but feel free to bring whatever kinds of things are interesting to you to those sessions.
Yeah, that sounds great. That totally makes sense now that I understand more about the purpose.
Yeah. Cool. Pedro, you've got, I guess, a related, unrelated point.
Yeah. Well, I think it's makes sense to highlight that change of the full width diff in Slack and ask people to direct feedback to the issue. I don't think we do that for most changes and most feature flags, but in this case, so the inline diff mode is the default, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe most people don't change that from the default. So most GitLabbers will see that change, but they might not understand if it was something that we did or something that they changed in their preferences or something like that. So I think it's worth pointing that out, like, hey, this is actually something that we did. Don't panic. You didn't break anything. Give us your feedback in the issue. I think that might be worth doing that once that is in production. I thought the merge request was already merged. Apparently not.
Yeah, I
But
agree. That's a good idea because I'm anticipating people posting in the Is It Known channel that it's a bug, because it is going to look like a bug at first. So
yeah.
and I say that like I like the idea still because it sounds crazy, and then when you think about when you're working locally, it's full width. So I mean, why wouldn't you have full width here?
I don't know. That's why we have the feature flag.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Annabelle, do you want to post? I don't. Oh, it's interesting. I guess it's set to merge. Although the merged result pipeline failed, it looks like it got kicked out.
Yeah.
I don't know the process anymore, and I don't know for feature flags. I mean, it has to go through staging, and then it makes it onto Canary, and then someone turns a feature flag on.
Yeah.
Yeah, Phil will be responsible for turning the feature flag on. We can just maybe a note in the issue and ask Phil to like let us know, and then we can post in the channel when that happens. There should be a feature flag issue, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there is. I think it's reasonable to ask Phil to post a message once he activates it to be more efficient. And we can, if you want, Kai, you can post a message there for Phil to copy paste or something like that.
Okay, yeah, I'll take care of that. There is a tracking issue for the feature flag too, so I think that we should be good. Cool.
Right.
Does anyone have anything else? I know we're bumping up against time, but
Yeah, I don't think we have time to discuss this, but I was really interested in what you posted somewhere yesterday, Kai, about removing the tabs on the merge request. Is there any documentation to follow? I can read more about that. I just think it's really interesting.
have we ever, I don't know, Pedro, have I ever written an issue, or has this only been in this call that I ever complain about tabs in general? I don't know.
So far, I think it's only been verbal. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I figured.
Never mind.
Yeah, it's a good catalyst. I should go and write like something. It's worth researching. The short of it is, well, there's two. One, I have no idea why the commits tab exists, except for the handful of users that want to do like commit-based reviews. Like, I don't entirely understand why it's there. And it's not something that like, I think we have a ton of research to understand why it's there, or like how it exists. I think it's like, it got added at one point, and now I think if we were to take another look, the question would be, would we add it again? The pipelines tab, also another tab that I don't know why it's there. And most of the time when I talk to people, they're like, I only look at the latest pipeline, which is in the widget on the overview tab. Very few people, I think, go back and scroll through like historical pipeline runs. You can also like see your historical pipeline runs if you really wanted to in like other places. And so when you think about like, what is the purpose of the code review page? The commits tab, we could probably figure out a different way to get you to that if you wanted. The pipelines tab, I don't know why it's there. And then the overview and changes tab is historically incredibly confusing for people, because the overview tab contains all discussions that have ever happened in the merge request. The changes tab only displays discussions that have happened on the latest version of the merge request, and versions are a concept that exist in our system, but they're based on pushes. They're not even based on like logical groupings or like commits. It's like when you push, we consider that a tag or a version, and then that's what we show commits in. So if you're in the changes tab and you're trying to go through and see if you've responded to all the feedback, you can't actually do that unless you go to the overview tab and like go through the overview tab. But then the overview tab isn't showing you the complete set of changes. It's only showing you like potentially old diffs that you've commented on previously. And so you don't know if you're in the right thing. And so to me, like, I think if we were to sort of rethink this, we'd want to rethink it in like a way that there's like one tab displays everything you need to deal with, and that's it. And like, there wouldn't be all these other tabs across the top. This is also like why we've been resistant to Secure wanting to add another tab, is because like, I sort of don't understand why these other tabs exist in the first place. So adding more places that people need to go to solve the completeness of the MR seems like a maybe not the path that we would take if we had enough time to research and figure that out, and like what would that flow be and look like. So that's how I feel about the tabs. I don't love them. I don't think people intuitively understand them, and I'd love to figure out a way to get past them.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
I think what Annabelle you've been working on is not exactly that, but it includes that. And yeah, that's one of the assumptions that we have when doing the research so far, is that confusion between overview and changes, and having to go to multiple places to get your work done. So yeah, that's what we're hoping to explore. And maybe, yeah, the best solution would be to remove all tabs, or maybe not, or just have a few of them, or have useful tabs, right? So let's see how that goes.
But it's something I'm happy to talk about more, or if you need me to like write it up, or I've looked at, there's another code review tool out there that doesn't have tabs, but has like a versions concept, which is something Pedro and I have talked about, like, is potentially part of that like I think would makes that clearer. So if you remind me
it's
enough,
worth opening an issue just
do it.
just so we have something to refer to and post brain dumps, ideas, anything like that. I think historically the tabs are there because competitors have those tabs. So that's just what everyone's used to. And that's just what we did, and never thought to change it because.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. I will add that to my list of things that I will try to accomplish this for you. And we'll go from there. But yeah, I appreciate the ask on that as well. Well, yeah, we're over at this point, but everyone enjoy the rest of your week and day, and we'll talk again soon.
Yeah. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.